The three men who are charged in the death of Ahmaud Arbery is currently underway in Georgia. This after we learned that the prosecutor who was formerly overseeing the case has also been indicted. And so we'll go probably a week or two through jury selection. We've heard about 600 people have received notices to serve on this jury. And we expect that the prosecution and defense are going to pick through these individuals person by person. I want you guys to take a look at recent coverage on this trial.
Closely watched murder trial for Ahmaud Arbery's accused killers kicked off on Monday in Georgia. Hundreds of people were ordered to report for jury duty in what could be a long, laborious effort to find jurors to hear the trial of three white men charged with fatally shooting the 25-year-old black man in February of 2020. Gregory McMichael, his son Travis, and their neighbor William Bryan are facing state charges including murder, false imprisonment, and aggravated assault. The defendants have all pleaded not guilty. The McMichaels say they suspected Arbery was a burglar and acted in self-defense. Arbery was unarmed and out for a jog in the neighborhood when the men chased him in their trucks and fought him before ultimately shooting him. The release of a graphic video of Arbery being killed prompted the state legislature to make significant changes to Georgia criminal law, including passage of the state's first hate crime statute.
I do think that Ahmaud was murdered because he was black. He was jogging through a predominantly white neighborhood and he was targeted.
Do you believe that you can get a fair and impartial jury in that area when there's been so much publicity in the case? Are you worried about that?
Yes, I have my concerns, being that the jurors will be picked from this community, but I'm hopefully that we'll get the right people in the right place to make the right decision.
Now, Ben, I know that we followed the Chauvin trial closely, and this is a little different because this isn't a case where you had an officer, right? This was three individuals who claimed that they were trying to make a citizen's arrest.
That's right.
Right. But nonetheless, it's a case of injustice.
Right.
Are you concerned about the jury selection, about this trial as well?
Oh, no, absolutely. One thing this country is prolific at is getting away with murder, specifically the murder of black men and women. And then the fact that we are in Georgia, and the fact that these men, one of them, the father in this case, was a former police officer, or is rather a former police officer. And that is how they were able to circumvent justice for as long as they did. And so I do have grave concern over whether or not we will get justice in this case. And more importantly, Georgia, what are we doing to prevent the next vigilante killing of black people?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean this case reminds me a lot of Trayvon Martin.
Mm,
These three men taking matters into their own hands. And so I do also think it's going to be an examination of the current laws there,
right.
what laws currently exist that allow people to act with the authority of law enforcement.
Yeah.
I feel like those are outdated, and hopefully whatever grounds for self-defense, because all three men pleaded not guilty. So
Mhm.
whatever grounds of self-defense, I think, is going to be backed by whatever legislation is enacted in Georgia that would allow these men to
That's right.
act as though they were law enforcement officers,
That's right.
similar to what we saw with in Trayvon Martin. In that situation, you had George Zimmerman who used the stand your ground law. Um, so this is going to be an examination of the law, and hopefully
That's right.
bring to light some overdue changes that
Right.
are needed.
Right. And it's also going to be an examination of the criminal justice process and the jury selection process. And we're going to see how the defense attorneys are going to and this is their right, of course, to get a fair trial as defendants. But But what's fair for white men in this country is decidedly different than what's fair for the rest of us, because we're going to see all of the jury reflect and look exactly like the peers of the defendants in this case, who are the men who ultimately killed Ahmaud Arbery.
And I think that as we examine the time we're in, and because Ahmaud Arbery, when we learned that he had been killed,
Yeah,
um, it was quite some time after the incident actually happened.
that's right.
And it, I feel like, was also a part of that week or two where the nation, it was like we learned about Ahmaud Arbery, we learned about Breonna Taylor, and
Yeah.
then we witnessed the murder of George Floyd. And
Mm,
so I feel like there was, this kind of buildup to the global
yeah. Yeah.
response that we saw. And in some way, Ben, I feel like these trials are a continuation of the historic moment that we're in.
Yeah.
And, so many people compare and contrast 2020 to the 50s and the 60s. And so to be able to tell whether or not we've truly made progress, we need to know that something in the criminal justice process has changed,
Yeah.
and that this system can work for Ahmaud Arbery's mother, that these
Right.
men can be found guilty and that they can be sentenced fairly.
Mm. And the real question for me, and I think in so many of these cases, is that we have the clear evidence that these men killed Ahmaud Arbery. There's no question about that. We do have to go um, through the justice process, lest we become vigilantes, much like them. That said, we really have a question on the table. Are we going to allow mm, the unjustified fear of Black people to continue to be an excuse for killing us? You
Mm,
compare this to George Zimmerman, but this is exactly the case. You're absolutely right, because George Zimmerman got away with murder, and the
yeah.
question now is, will these men be able to do the same?
What I will say, what was completely shocking when I learned that the prosecutor was being indicted and that there
That's
had been
right.
some evidence to show that McMichael was a former employee of hers, and that she did what she could to avoid him being arrested. And I just thought that that was extremely shocking, because historically in this country, when you have seen white people in positions of power who have used that power to cover up misconduct, usually
Mm,
there is no accountability.
that's right.
But in this instant, the fact that she's facing charges, the fact that she's been indicted, I think speaks volumes that we indeed are in a different time.
Mm, mm. And it also shows a parallel to Bob McCullough, the prosecuting attorney in Ferguson, Missouri, who handled the case of Mike Brown. And we saw how he inserted himself on behalf of the defendants. You don't see this happening in any other case except for when it's a Black person who has been killed. We saw the same. I had the same feeling. I can't say that we saw this exact same thing with Trayvon Martin, because they took him to trial, but there are some things about the trial itself that made me, I didn't really fully believe that the prosecutors were on the side of justice. And that's going to be the real question here. And as you said, Georgia, the prosecutor in this case is under investigation because she inserted herself on behalf of the police officers at the expense of this Black man's life. And that, I believe, is part and parcel of the disease that is at the rot of this empire.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then we learned about Kelsey Rayner,
Mm,
which was another case that she was overseeing. And in that case, one of the individuals who was working at the jail where Kelsey Rayner died was also her former employee. And it was
mm,
interesting that there was no indictment in that case. And so now we're beginning to see a pattern of misuse of power with this specific attorney there. But, Ben, the other thing that I think about, is there in Georgia, there's another case. Kendrick Johnson, who was
Yeah.
found in Valdosta. He was a high school student, was found rolled up in a mat.
Yeah.
And there's now a movie called Finding Kendrick Johnson that's on Amazon Prime. I had a chance to watch it yesterday, and the images are just burned into my mind. But what you cannot ignore in that case is the cover up,
Mm,
and at what point is America going to reckon with this long standing history
mm,
of covering up injustices and violence against specifically Black men?
yeah.
There's been this long standing history. I mean, even they drew the parallel in this documentary to Emmett Till
Mm,
and how he was accused by a white woman of, he whistled at her, but we found out 70 years later that she recanted her accusations and said that they were lies.
mm,
And so
mm.
our country has this long standing history, so many examples
Yeah.
of cases
Yeah.
that just appear to be covered up.
Yeah. That's because this country has a vested interest in the continuation, right? It's been a long-standing vilification of Black people, Black men specifically, most certainly Black women too. They, they, this country has a vested interest in maintaining that fear of Blackness, and the fear of other. Right, we see very similar parallels with other marginalized communities that are always lifted up to be the boogeyman. But in our case, it ends with our death, because that is the justification that gives that police officer in Ohio the ability to pull up on the scene of 12-year-old Tamir Rice, and without even ascertaining anything, within 2.7 seconds, executed a 12-year-old Black boy. And that's because this country is used to viewing us as as monsters, and they're maintaining that image.
Yeah. Yeah, it breaks my heart continuously.
Yeah.
Ben, I know that you've been tracking another story this morning.
Yeah, no, I do believe that all these things are connected. We're following the committee vote that is to occur today, whether or not Steve Bannon, the consultant, the advisor for Donald Trump, he is I would consider him to be the henchman behind the American version of this global right wing reaction movement that we're seeing. And to put that into simple terms, that means all of the fascists around the world are uniting, Georgia. All of the reactionaries around the world are uniting in their opposition towards progress, towards modernity, altogether. And definitely against marginalized communities, and that includes the Black community. Well, there's going to be a vote today whether or not to hold Steve Bannon in contempt as it pertains to his unwillingness to testify with regard to January 6th. I have a couple of clips that I want us to take a look at, but in context, I want you to also consider this. Former President Trump is suing. He is suing in order to block the January 6th committee and the National Archives from releasing the documents and all of the information that the committee needs to carry out the investigation. That said, I want us to take a look at this first clip to give us a little bit more information on the testimony that Steve Bannon is trying to avoid, and the possibility of contempt, as well as this lawsuit that's coming from negative 45 Donald Trump.
And whom exactly is former President Trump suing?
So, Jake, in this filing that just crossed in the D.C. Circuit Court, the former president has filed a lawsuit against the January 6th committee and the National Archives in an effort to keep secret a whole tranche of documents that the committee is looking for in regards to their investigation as to what happened on January 6th and what potential role the former president may have played.
And so that was a clip from CNN and Jake Tapper, just kind of outlining the underlying thing that's happening here in Georgia. And so as we are trying to get progress towards better understanding what happened on January 6th, the former president, negative 45, is doing all he can to block it. Now, I want to give a couple of more details as it pertains to Steve Bannon. In this next clip, they break down the possibility of him being held in contempt. Let's take a listen in.
Probing the deadly January 6th assault on the U.S. Capitol said on Thursday that Steve Bannon had refused to cooperate with its investigation and that it would convene on Tuesday to vote on holding the longtime Trump advisor in criminal contempt.
Bannon had been subpoenaed to testify before the January 6th Select Committee. It wasn't a surprise, though. Bannon had told the committee that under guidance from Trump, he wasn't going to show. According to the New York Times, Bannon's attorney told the committee Bannon wouldn't cooperate until such a time as you reach an agreement with President Trump on claims of executive privilege or receive a court ruling.
The committee's chairman, Democrat Benny Thompson, said in a statement, quote, "The Select Committee will not tolerate defiance of our subpoenas, so we must move forward with proceedings to refer Mr. Bannon for criminal contempt." The subpoena to Bannon is one of more than a dozen issued by the Democratic Select Committee, with some depositions scheduled as soon as this week. It was not immediately clear whether any former aides to Donald Trump would appear after the former president urged them to refuse to cooperate. 3 other close Trump allies, Mark Meadows, Dan Scavino, and Kash Patel, have received similar subpoenas, but the extent of their cooperation was unclear.
The committee will vote on contempt charges for Bannon next week. If then the House approves the charges, they'll go to the Justice Department with the recommendation the DOJ pursue a legal case against Bannon. Anyone who's found guilty for contempt of Congress is then guilty of a crime that could result in a fine and up to a year behind bars.
Now, to be certain, Georgia, even if we get as far as actually holding Steve Bannon in contempt, I doubt very seriously that he will get that maximum sentence of a year behind bars. But they are playing a game of chicken with this committee because they understand the culpability that not only Donald Trump has, but I would argue the entire Republican Party has with the terrorist attack on January 6th.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and there's always the parallels, the misuse of power.
Mm.
Here you have individuals, even looking at Trump, who had the highest seat in this nation, and he absolutely misused his power. And now
Yeah,
what we're seeing here with this investigation, and people who are trying to avoid coming forward with information, and ultimately what they're trying to reveal here is who organized this.
right.
This wasn't just something that everybody just showed up just sporadically at the same time.
Hmm.
There was organized communication that
Yes, sir.
happened for these individuals to show up on January 6th, and trying to figure out who sent the orders, who gave them those marching orders to go storm the Capitol. That, I think, right now is really what this investigation is about. But what we're
That's right.
seeing is everybody is trying to avoid accountability.
Mm.
Everybody's trying to sweep this under the rug and minimize this. I saw on my timeline over the last week a few mentors or former bosses who attended the Million Man March, and
Mm.
they showed just a sea of Black men on the steps of the Capitol, but nobody stormed it.
Hmm.
Not one
Come on.
person caused any damage. More than 1 million people. It's the largest gathering in DC history. And here we are looking at all of these individuals who I absolutely believe received direct orders from Trump or someone in his administration to do what they did on January 6th.
Oh, absolutely, without question. And I want to urge people to understand that this doesn't happen without a serious level of organization. They are organized. They are organized. They have their private communications. They have their encrypted signal chats. They are organizing as furiously to stop progress as I would hope we are organizing on our side to forward progress. But there's some questions there because, they have funding for this. January 6th doesn't happen, Georgia, without major funding. And I think this is also what they're trying to block, that information from being released. You also have culpability across the board. You have little Charlie Kirk, as our friend, Brother Mac refers to him, sponsored 80 buses, Turning Points USA. It is a major organization that's all the way around the country, founded by Charlie Kirk. 80 buses. So there's money, there's a money trail, there's culpability, and I think it's going to come all the way from the top. You're right. Donald Trump, all the way down to the rank and file people who have already been arrested.
You bring up a good point about the encrypted messages, the encrypted channels in which people can organize and do communications. I wonder why the FBI can't subpoena Signal. If you're
Oh,
not familiar with Signal,
no, I
it
am. Don't.
is a
Yeah.
app
Yeah.
that you can download on your phone, and it's probably one of the only ones I know about that has those encrypted messages.
Hmm.
I wonder why the FBI can't subpoena that company and ask them to hand over any communication about January
Yeah.
6th. There's got to be some way, and I'm sure. Obviously, we're getting into muddy water here in terms of overstepping people's privacy. But in a case where you have a national threat, a national attack on our capital,
Mm.
I think there might be some grounds to override some of those laws in the same way or we saw laws overridden when they went and stormed the Capitol and really there was little to no arrests on the day of, right?
Right.
So
Right.
there's got to be a way on some of those encrypted channels for the FBI to get their hands on those
Yeah.
communications.
Well, you've caught me in a unique position here, Georgia, because I am firmly opposed to the FBI even thinking they should be able to get those messages. Because just as much as they're organizing over there, um, I might be doing a little organizing myself. But now here's the flip side of that. The flip side of that is the FBI has historically shown that they don't give a damn about anyone's privacy.
Absolutely.
The COINTELPRO has infiltrated the black community. I mean, we even have a new iteration, COINTELBRO, where you have white infiltrators of the progressive movement, right? So the FBI is very capable of doing it, but I am loath to give them any license to do it because whenever it is done, it has historically been brought down on the backs and the lives and the
They
necks of
don't
black
have
people
those boundaries when it's
at
black
all,
organizers.
at
We've
all.
seen them throw away the rule book, even with the latest movie about MLK,
Mm,
where you see J. Edgar Hoover following him and tapping his phone lines and doing all of these things. And so, while I agree, on the other hand, it frustrates me because we've
they done it
seen
to
them
us
do away with these boundaries before, but
plenty of
only
time.
when they're investigating someone who looks like you and me.
Hmm. That's right. That's right. And also, Georgia, the only other time I see the FBI really be effective and the federal government be effective is in blocking unions. And this is Striketober. Coming up in the next block, we're going to be speaking with Mike Elk. He is a union reporter with the Payday Report. And we're going to see all of the actions that are taking place around the country. It is a beautiful thing to see all the strikes that are taking place on behalf of workers. And then we can expand the conversation because we'll see also there's an intersection the government loves to get involved in the communications of union organizers. So we'll discuss that a little bit today at the 9 o'clock. I'm sorry, at the 8:30 hour.
Well, and before we move on, I do want to take a look at Texas and Florida banning the vaccination mandate. We are seeing a decline in COVID numbers across the country, but there's concerns that there could be another spike at some point, especially when you have states that are banning a vaccination mandate. I want you guys to take a look at the latest from Fox News. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we have
Hmm.
one of the governors from those states representing and explaining more about why he decided to make that ban on the
Where does
vaccination
this
mandate.
end? We're talking about a federal mandate for a shot. As you know, there's waning effectiveness of these shots. Are people going to be required by the federal government to take a shot every single year for the rest of their lives? Americans need to come to grips with the unconstitutional overreach by the Biden administration.
And so calling it a constitutional overreach. But Ben, I mean, we've had vaccination mandates our entire lives.
Yeah. Georgia, this is peculiar to me because we are dealing with a series of governors who are executing their part in a much broader plan. You cannot tell me that in the midst of a global pandemic, the likes we have not seen since 1918, that the irrationality that we're seeing in Ron DeSantis in Florida, Tate Reeves rather in Mississippi, Greg Abbott in Texas, and the governor from Alabama, all Republican governors doing everything that they can to ensure the maximum amount of deaths occur. Because to oppose a vaccine mandate, which you are absolutely correct, which is something that no one can go to public school. You can go to any school without getting vaccinated. This is not constitutional overreach. In fact, it is part and parcel of the responsibility of the federal government to ensure the public health. That said, why is it that we have such an organized effort by Republicans to kill as many people as possible with COVID-19?
Mm, 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 mm. There are some places that are up to 90% vaccinated rate, right? More than 90% of their population in some states have been vaccinated. And the amount of deaths down, the amount of infections down. And so when you look at the numbers, it has just been proven that the vaccination works.
That's right.
And so, if you need to get a booster, I mean, you got to do what you got to do. But
Right.
the fact that we're hearing from Abbott, the governor of Texas, there, saying, what are we're going to have to get a shot for the rest of our lives. I mean, what do you
If you
want? Do
want to
you want
live.
people to keep dying? Do you
Yeah.
want our children to keep dying?
Mm,
I
mm-mm.
mean, it's just this entire pandemic has been so frustrating because you've truly been able to see people's privilege and power. The only people who are saying things like that are those who have the privilege to do so.
Mm, mm. Absolutely. And the savagery to do so, because death is pretty permanent. If I have to take a booster shot every year for the rest of my life in order to keep living, sign me up. Greg Abbott will be in that line too, but he wants his constituents to not be in that line. I really just need someone to really need people to understand that this is a concerted effort. You don't get to 750,000 deaths in a pandemic when we have a vaccine unless there's an organized effort to maximize it. And we see the same talking points from governors. We see it at the organizers, the people who are at these town hall meetings and the school board meetings across the country. There's money and organization, and I think what we're going to find, Georgia, is that there's a huge overlap in the talking points, in the conversations, and the investigations into January 6th. There's going to be a huge overlap with
You're
the
reading
same
my
people who
mind
are
here.
pushing
You're
this.
reading my mind.
Yeah.
Because I was gonna say, how you have a group chat, right? I think that what we're seeing play out with COVID-19 is still in that same group chat that started
Hmm.
before January 6th.
That's
And
right.
it's just now morphed and evolved into this attack on vaccines and mask mandates. But it's the same folks.
And you know what,
It's the
Georgia?
same folks.
The same folks who are there talking about the thin blue line, the same folks who are there opposing the case for Ahmaud Arbery, justice for Ahmaud Arbery, the same people who think that Black lives don't matter. Those are the same people in that exact same group chat, and they're the same villains throughout this entire narrative.
With that said, we are on the clock, but stick around for more on the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Good morning.